First class with that sweatshirt. Sure you are, sweetheart. The words weren't spoken with humor, but rather like a sugar-coated knife, sharp, sweet, and poisonous. Brenda, the blonde woman in the navy blue uniform of Ascend didn't smile. She smirked. The kind of smirk Maya Coleman had seen her entire life, from grocery store checkouts to aerospace engineering conferences. A smirk that meant, I know who you are, and you don't belong here. Maya said nothing. She stood still, letting the woman's contempt slide over her like a light rain. She wore an old gray Howard University hoodie, plain sweatpants, and worn white sneakers. An outfit anyone could wear, but when your skin is brown, it becomes an accusation. Maya was 28. She had lived long enough to know that look. A look that scanned like an X-ray, not to find stains, but to assess whether she was worthy of stepping into first class. Her passport still lay on the inspection counter. Brenda's hand rested on the blue leather cover as if it were something foreign. Not a federal document, but an intrusion. No one in the line said a word. Not a single cough. Not a glance of intervention. Only the harsh white glow of fluorescent lights and an atmosphere pulled tight by truths no one dared to voice, but everyone felt. Brenda tilted her head and raised an eyebrow. A passport for a domestic flight? That's unusual. Maya nodded, her voice as light as wind. It's a legal identification, and valid. Brenda didn't answer immediately. She flipped through the pages, then flipped back, looked up, scanned Maya again from head to toe, this time unable to hide her irritation at having to acknowledge something she didn't want to believe. Somewhere behind them, a child was laughing. A white man in a suit had just passed through the gate. No one asked him anything, but Maya knew. She knew it always started with a line that seemed small, and ended with a system that would never be the same again. Hartsfield-Jackson was a world in miniature where passengers flowed past each other like waves, where apologies had been replaced with speed, and where prejudice was sometimes embedded as profoundly as the screening procedures. Maya stepped aside, her eyes never leaving Brenda. Brenda Kowalski, moved like clockwork. Every keystroke, every frown was infused with a practiced, polished discrimination, as if it had been rehearsed all her life. A white family with 3 children clinging to their mother's legs had just arrived. Brenda changed her tone to bright, sugary, "Aw, look at those dimples. You're such a little gentleman." That smile was a gift. And it vanished completely when a brown-skinned older man approached to ask about his flight schedule. Brenda didn't even look up. "It'll come when it comes. Just listen for the announcements." Maya inhaled deeply, not out of surprise, but from deep familiarity. For the past 10 days, she had lived like a ghost, posing as a passenger, recording every minor flaw in the aviation security system. The covert project, codenamed Operation Skytrace, designed by Maya herself, wasn't just meant to catch equipment leaks, but the invisible fractures within people. And here, standing in front of her, was one of those cracks. She knew the name Brenda. Had seen it mentioned briefly in an internal complaint in a video clip that had been quickly scrubbed from the internet. However, there had never been concrete evidence. Until today. Maya adjusted her backpack and stepped up to the counter again. She held up her phone with her e-ticket, and the scanner blinked green. She offered her passport not because it was required, but to study the reaction. Brenda glanced briefly, then paused, looked at Maya again, then at the Howard University hoodie, the sneakers, the makeup-free face. a look that seemed to ask, "No way someone like you earned that degree." And then, like a song played on loop, she asked, "Why the passport planning on flying international?" Maya replied softly, "I've used my passport all week. It's the official ID. Is there a problem?" Brenda flicked her hair. Her voice dropped lower but no less biting. "I'm just doing my job, sweetheart. We're supposed to keep an eye out for unusual things." Unusual. A simple word. But when placed in the wrong mouth, it lays bare an entire ideology. Brenda held the passport as if she were inspecting a counterfeit item picked up at a flea market. She tilted the blue leather booklet under the light, then jerked her chin and said, "This photo doesn't look like you, huh?" Maya didn't rush to respond. She had heard that line many times at banks, at customs, even from an ex-boyfriend. "That photo was taken 5 years ago," Maya said calmly. "But it's me." Brenda let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because those in power always had room for mockery. "You look younger. You seemed happier back then. Full name here is Maya Coleman, Ph.D. A doctorate in what exactly? Art, fashion, design." Maya took a breath. The tiny cuts were beginning to bleed not on her skin, but in her sense of dignity. "Aerospace engineering," she answered, revealing for the first time the voice of someone who had once walked out of Federal Transportation Security briefings. Brenda raised an eyebrow, then smirked. "Oh, please, anyone can print a PhD these days. The internet's full of them." By that point, the line behind Maya had started to take notice. No one said anything, but eyes were lifting from their phones. Some looked at Brenda curious. Some looked at Maya with doubt. Brenda flipped the passport around, tapping her red nail on the ID page. "You don't look like someone who could afford first class. Maybe someone bought it for you. Or maybe you found another way to get it. People like you. People like you." Two tidy words. Clean, polished, but more poisonous than any curse. Maya placed her hand lightly on the counter. No trembling, no backing down. Her voice was no longer gentle. It was cold, like sharpened steel. "I'm asking you to do one straightforward thing: scan the passport and verify it in the system. If you have any doubts, call your supervisor. Do not stand here and insult me with baseless insinuations." Brenda folded her arms. She gave a cold smile. A heavy moment passed. Then, as if preparing for a theatrical scene, Brenda muttered just loud enough for those behind to hear, or maybe, "You faked it all. I've seen fake IDs, fake credit cards. Is there anything people like you can't fake?" The air at the boarding counter suddenly thickened. A young woman behind Maya pulled out her phone, not raised, just held close to her body, camera aimed forward. No one spoke. But the silence began to take shape. It expanded like a drop in air pressure waiting to burst. Maya remained still, but her eyes were no longer those of a passenger. They were the eyes of someone who knew exactly who she was, and knew that the person across from her was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Brenda gripped the passport between two fingers like it was a suspicious flyer handed out on a street corner. She tilted her head, squinted not to read more clearly, but as if searching for a justification to act wrongly. That look of triumph had already appeared on her face long before the act itself. "I'll take care of this right here," Brenda said, voice low but loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Someone like you doesn't get past me." And then the sound came. A rip, dry, sharp, quick, like silk being sliced. But to Maya, it rang out like an alarm from a collapsing system. Her passport, a symbol of citizenship and federal property. The key that had taken her across the world as an investigator was now torn in half by a blonde woman with a fake smile and misplaced authority. The two halves fell onto the counter like butterflies with broken wings. Silence. No one moved. Even the child begging for snacks behind them suddenly fell quiet. An older man muttered, "Dear God." The young woman filming quietly pressed the record button, keeping her phone at hip level, unmoving. Brenda, now breathing in with pride, stood up straighter, arms crossed, looking at Maya as if she had just defeated an imposter. "This isn't going anywhere," she whispered. "I've been working here for 20 years. I know your type." But what Brenda didn't know was Maya Coleman was no longer just a first-class passenger in sweats. She was no longer the quiet, composed woman who stepped back to avoid trouble. She was a senior federal inspector with the National Transportation Security Agency. She was the person who had authored the policy on gate misconduct. And Brenda had just shredded her entire career with the most foolish act of her life. Maya bent down, picked up the two halves of her passport. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline, the thing that always came when an investigation began. She looked up, meeting Brenda's eyes for the first time entirely. "You just destroyed property of the United States government," Maya said, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "That's a violation of Title 18, Section 1543 of the Federal Criminal Code. Maximum penalty up to 25 years in prison." Brenda blinked. You're threatening me?" "No," Maya replied, pulling out her phone and pressing a name in her contacts labeled Director. "I'm reporting an emergency and you've just become the center of it." The call connected after 3 rings. The voice on the other end came quickly, urgent but professional. "Reed here. Director Matthews. This is Maya Coleman. I'm at Gate B14 Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, activating code Indigo. We have a destruction of federal property and a serious racial discrimination incident involving an Ascend Air employee." A brief silence followed on the other end. "Confirmed. Do you have recording witnesses?" "Yes. Passenger video. And over 24 witnesses. I require a special security response and FBI liaison at the airport and immediate contact with Ascend Air's legal department. We may be dealing with a systemic breach." Maya ended the call. Her eyes locked on Brenda, who was no longer standing tall. Her uniform clung to her body with sweat, and her gaze wavered like a ship losing direction. "Who do you think I am?" Maya asked softly. Brenda swallowed. A passenger. Someone faking documents. I was doing my..." "No," Maya cut her off. "You weren't doing your job. If you had, you would have known your duty was to scan the passport, check it under ultraviolet light, or call a supervisor if you had doubts. What you are never permitted to do is destroy federal documents. So I'll ask again. Were you ever trained?" Brenda took a half-step back. I went with instinct. Something didn't feel right. "Your instinct," Maya said, "is exactly where prejudice disguises itself as protocol." The murmurs began to return. A few people in the line quietly stepped back, making room as 2 airport security officers arrived, followed by a pair of agents in dark suits, small FBI badges clipped at their collars. Brenda's eyes widened. "What? What's this?" They're here, I told you already, Maya said gently, almost sadly. You didn't just insult a passenger. You just triggered a federal investigation, direct, public, and irreversible. One of the agents stepped forward. Ms. Coleman, I'm a senior inspector with the Office of Aviation Security and Emergency Response under the FAA, Maya said, showing her badge. This is now a designated investigation scene. Flight 11142 will not depart. This area must be secured. No one touches the counter until all evidence is preserved. Brenda looked around, panicked. Those who had once stood silent now looked on with clarity, not at Maya, but at the truth. The airport, usually a well-oiled machine, had become a broken rhythm. The boarding announcements stopped entirely. Passengers whispered. Some quietly recorded videos, but no one spoke a word. All eyes now focused on the young woman in the hoodie who had been humiliated, and the blonde woman turning pale like a statue. Maya turned back to the two agents. I'm Maya Coleman, she said, her voice no longer soft, but clear like a bell echoing through a cathedral. Senior Inspector, Office of Aviation Security and Emergency Response, Federal Aviation Administration. For the past 10 days, I've led a covert investigation called Operation Indigo, targeting security vulnerabilities caused by human factors. And today, at Gate B14, I witnessed the perfect case study for why that initiative exists. Brenda stood frozen. Her eyes were wide lips, parted as if to object, but no words could save her. Frank Miller, the station supervisor for Ascend Air, rushed in his tie, askew eyes darting like a man looking for shelter from a storm. What the hell is going on here? He barked. Brenda. What did you do? Brenda stammered. I had doubts about the passport. I thought it was fake. Frank turned to Maya, quickly softening his tone. Ma'am, Ms. Coleman, this might all be a misunderstanding. I'm sure we can work this out. No need to escalate. This far. Maya looked at him with her gaze as sharp as a razor's edge. Misunderstanding. One of your employees just publicly destroyed federal property, insulted a passenger with racially discriminatory language, and refused to follow FAA-mandated verification procedures. She stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but no one dared to interrupt. And in doing so, she didn't just disrupt one flight. She triggered a nationwide investigation that forces us to put Ascend Air's entire operation under a microscope, starting with this Atlanta station. The two FBI agents had begun collecting evidence. One opened a Ziploc bag and carefully retrieved the two halves of the passport. The other approached Brenda and read aloud, Ms. Brenda Kowalski, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used as evidence. Frank took a step back, his face pale as paper. He had never imagined a minor incident from a longtime employee could bring down the entire terminal. Maya wasn't finished. She looked directly at him. Are you aware that in the past 5 years, there have been 14 formal complaints involving Brenda? These include passengers with disabilities, Muslim travelers, women of color denied boarding because they wore a headscarf. All of those complaints were marked resolved by you. No terminations, no disciplinary action, just retraining. Frank opened his mouth to respond, but Maya pulled out a printed folder, the pages still smelling of fresh ink. We've obtained internal records, backed up all security footage, and we now have proof that this system isn't just rotten, it's been protected by you. Once again, silence fell, but this time it was the silence of collapse. Frank was no longer the man in a suit behind a boarding desk. He was a man who would soon have to answer far too many questions in court. An hour later, the investigation team's temporary command post had been set up inside Ascendair's HR meeting room, with its frosted glass walls, cold white fluorescent lighting, and faces even more frigid. Maya sat at the head of the table. In front of her was a file nearly 3 inches thick. It wasn't a formal indictment, but it carried the weight of a verdict. "We've reviewed all internal complaints from the past 5 years," Maya said, her tone like a lecture, not loud, not sharp, but each word landed like a hammer blow. 14 cases related to Brenda Kowalski. Of those, 9 involved passengers of color, 4 involved people with disabilities, and 1 was a Muslim traveler. All of them stamped resolved, and all of them signed by you, Frank Miller. Frank sat on the opposite side, fingers tightly interlocked, back hunched, as if trying to retreat into himself. Sweat gathered at his temples, but he didn't dare wipe it away. Maya continued flipping through the pages one by one. David Chen presented a New York driver's license, and Brenda asked, "Do you even speak English?" Aisha Sharma lost her seat for her 2 small children after requesting children's meals. A retired sergeant with both legs amputated was told to step out of the line for obstructing flow. She slid the stack of papers toward him. The paper was cold, but the touch made Frank visibly shrink. "You called these cases retraining. Just reminders. System error. No, Mr. Miller. This is a pattern, and you are its enabler." Outside, the airport announcement system continued in the distance, a reminder that the world still turned. But inside this room, a man's career had come to a halt. Frank tried to grasp at something. I just wanted to keep things running smoothly, avoid any noise. Every time there was a complaint, I tried to handle it internally. Handle it internally, Maya repeated. "You didn't handle it. You buried it. You slapped duct tape over a crack and turned away until it became a sinkhole." An agent entered the room holding a printed email exchange between Brenda and Frank. Maya took it and read aloud a line. "Don't worry about the Chen thing. I handled it. Just don't be so obvious next time, LOL." That LOL, once a casual chuckle, now sounded like the final nail in the coffin for both careers. Maya turned to the team of investigators reviewing employee computers. "Expand the audit internal emails, maintenance logs, seating records. I want to know if this is just one bad apple or an entire rotten orchard." Frank started to rise, but Maya gestured firmly. "Sit down, Mr. Miller. This investigation is no longer about a lost or stolen passport. It's much bigger now, and we're just getting started." 2 days later, the whiteboard in the investigation room was covered in diagrams, arrows, and names. Under the stark fluorescent lights, connections between Brenda Frank Flight 819 and maintenance log discrepancy emerged like a medical map of a diseased system. Maya stood at the board, marker in hand. She no longer wore a hoodie. Today, she wore a navy blue suit, a white blouse, and a name badge pinned to her chest like a seal of truth. "We've confirmed this isn't just about Brenda violating passenger protocols. The entire Atlanta station of Ascend Air has been operating on a foundation of rule bending to save time and money." A technical investigator spoke up. "The maintenance team extended the service life of at least 17 components beyond manufacturer recommendations, including the cabin pressure sensor on Flight 899. That sensor was the one that malfunctioned and forced an emergency landing." Yes, and the final maintenance report was signed by an engineer who was on vacation in the Bahamas that day. Maya didn't blink. She turned to Frank, who had been held for investigative support. You approved that report. Frank nodded, barely audible. I assumed someone had checked it. No, Maya replied. You wanted to believe it was checked because it was convenient, but convenience doesn't protect passengers. Convenience doesn't save lives. Another analyst presented a statistical report. There's a pattern: passengers with Middle Eastern or African names are disproportionately assigned middle seats, even when the flight has empty aisles and windows. Their luggage also goes missing nearly 3 times more often than other passengers. Maya frowned. That's no longer negligence. That's the systematization of bias justified by data. One of Maya's quotes from the meeting was written across the whiteboard. This isn't about one bad employee. This is a culture of tolerance where performance metrics matter more than human dignity and departure times matter more than fairness. At that moment, the investigation team received an internal audio recording from 3 months prior. In it, Frank could be heard saying, "Complaints about discrimination. Just slow us down. Keep it light. Just don't get caught on camera." No one in the room needed to add anything else. Maya stood. Each step she took felt like a nail being driven into the concrete floor. Starting next week, the entire Atlanta station will be partially suspended for investigation. The FAA will assign independent monitors. We will also recommend a temporary license suspension unless there's a commitment to comprehensive reform. A reporter from the Washington Chronicle had already received the first leaked files. The story about the torn passport was only the spark. The real story was, how many flights have taken off with prejudice sitting in the captain's chair? 3 days later, the video of Brenda tearing the passport appeared across every platform, from morning news broadcasts to a flood of Instagram stories. It was exactly 28 seconds long. But those 28 seconds were enough to bring down an entire media empire. First class, with that sweatshirt. Sweetheart. Sound of ripping. I'll take care of this myself. The words, the look, and the red-painted hand crushing the national emblem needed no caption, no editing, no narration. The truth spoke for itself. Brenda Kowalski was arrested at her home on Tuesday morning. She opened the door in pajamas, hair disheveled, no makeup, no lipstick. But the cameras still recognized the face once held high at gate B14, now bowed low, shielding from the lens handcuffed on her front lawn. She was charged with 3 counts: destruction of federal property, obstruction of aviation security procedures, violation of federal civil rights through systemic discrimination. Frank Miller, hoping for leniency, gave a statement. In a recorded interview with investigators, he said, "I knew Brenda had some behavior issues, but she was quick. No complaints. I needed someone like that to keep our KPIs on track." Maya listened to that recording from the temporary command center. She didn't flinch, didn't get angry. She wrote in her notes, "He didn't choose efficiency. He chose convenience." The Federal Aviation Administration issued an official statement. Ascend Air has committed serious violations in maintenance oversight, passenger protocol, and personnel supervision. The airline will be fined $54 million and placed under special monitoring for the next 5 years. Maya was appointed to oversee structural reform at 3 major hubs. As part of its penalty, Ascend Air was required to implement mandatory unconscious bias training, an anonymous reporting system, and the 28-second video is required viewing in every onboarding training course. The young woman who filmed the clip was interviewed on CNN. "I just felt it was something I had to do. I couldn't just stand there and pretend I didn't see." Maya sent her a handwritten letter. Justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins with someone who dares to hold the camera steady. Frank was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Brenda received 9 years without parole. They didn't cry in the courtroom. They bowed their heads. Not out of shame, but history had recorded their names in a way that could never be erased. 6 months later, on a cold but crystal-clear day in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building gleamed under pale sunlight. Inside, during a hearing of the Transportation Security Committee, one name echoed across documents monitors and whispered in every gaze, Maya Coleman. She walked in quietly, without an entourage, only carrying a leather case holding documents, a torn old passport, and a voice that was once considered unnecessary. Behind her on the large screen, the image of the torn passport was displayed. The American eagle is split between 2 jagged halves, a tear that could never be healed but must never be forgotten. She didn't begin with accusations. She started with a story. I wasn't planning to speak. I just wanted to fly home after 10 days of work. I dressed comfortably, wore no badge, and made no display of my title. I wanted to be treated like any other passenger. And in the moment I chose silence, I realized something. If a black woman with credentials, with authority, with a legal passport can still be treated like a threat, then what happens every day to those who carry nothing? The hearing room was utterly still. Maya continued each word like a nail driven straight. This isn't about one bad employee. It isn't about one foolish decision. This is about a culture that treats bias as intuition, discrimination as unwritten protocol, and insult as something everyone just puts up with. She presented the evidence, including statistics on ignored complaints, internal emails mocking policy, and forged maintenance records. There were no outbursts, only numbers, and a calm that froze the entire room. A senator asked, "What do you believe is the greatest risk to aviation today?" Maya didn't hesitate. Not bombs, not guns, but the dismissive gaze of those entrusted with power. Because when contempt leads someone to rip a passport, overlook a maintenance warning, or deliberately misplace a passenger, then it is no longer a personal emotion. It is a threat to national safety. As the hearing concluded, Maya packed up her documents. A young black congressional aide approached, voice trembling as she whispered, "Ms. Maya, I just wanted to say thank you for not staying silent. I've never seen someone like me stand in that seat before." Maya smiled. "I used to be silent. I thought doing good work was enough. But that day at gate B14, I realized sometimes not speaking up is the same as being complicit." She walked out of the Capitol building, sunlight warming her face, like a confirmation that a new page had been turned. The story of Maya Coleman is not one of revenge. It is a warning that the things we dismiss as small, a glance, a comment, can open the door to an entire system of wrong. And sometimes, to change an entire industry, all it takes is one person standing up to say, "No, not today."